talked a little bit about the deportation rates that happened over the holiday weekend. Obviously, there are a lot of Democratic lawmakers on the Hill that are very upset about this. They're going to ask the administration to grant temporary protected status for some of these people. I'm wondering what your reaction is to that. It sounded like you're not inclined to shift policy in any way.
That's correct. At this point, our policy will remain the same. But I do think that given the sensitivity of this issue, it's worth me spending at least a little time here just reminding people what our policy is. When the president put in place, used his executive authority to try to reform as much of the immigration system as he could using only his executive authority. That included the Department of Homeland Security implementing some prosecutorial discretion, some guidance that would be used to prioritize for removal those individuals who don't have the legal basis for remaining in the country but yet are accused of crimes. We've also prioritized for removal those individuals who have only recently crossed the border. And the idea here is that we should prioritize felons, the deportation of felons, over the separation of families. Given the limited law enforcement resources that we have to work with, that's a rather common sense proposition. The individuals who were involved in some of the operations that have gotten a lot of attention fell into the category, broadly, people who had recently crossed the border. Now, what's also true is even for those individuals that are prioritized for removal, those individuals, though, are still given access to the justice system and given access to due process. And the administration is committed to that process. In fact, some of part of our response to the surge that we saw at the border about a year and a half ago was to actually increase the amount of resources that are devoted to that justice process. So this is a system of due process that we take quite seriously. And it was only after individuals had exhausted the legal remedies available to them to claim asylum or to be granted some other form of humanitarian relief, only then was the decision made to remove them.
And how would you describe the White House's level of involvement in that decision and these specific operations?
These are enforcement operations. So this is consistent with the kind of prosecutorial guidance that's been put in place by the Department of Homeland Security. But obviously executing these enforcement actions are the responsibility of law enforcement professionals.
So no one at the White House was notified that this was going to happen in advance, or was there some notification?
Well, I can't speak to any sort of communication that takes place between the Department of Homeland Security and the White House. But for decisions like this and decisions to move forward with operations, those are obviously decisions that are appropriately made by law enforcement professionals.
And just lastly, is it accurate then to describe this as part of a broader attempt to prevent another crisis like we saw in 2014?
Well, I think our desire to make clear that individuals should not embark on the dangerous journey from Central America to the southwest border, that's a case that we've tried to tell in a variety of ways, including by saying publicly that people shouldn't attempt this journey, and they certainly shouldn't entrust their children into the hands of unscrupulous human traffickers to make that journey. The administration has also cracked down on human traffickers that have preyed upon people who are in a rather desperate situation. The administration has also invested in trying to enhance the resources that are available to governments in Central America like Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to help them better account for the security situation in their own country. In fact, the administration sought $1 billion in funding that could be used to work with the governments down there to address the situation. Congress did appropriate $750 million for that task. We obviously were pleased to see that commitment from Congress to this effort. There also has been an effort underway to establish alternative paths for those individuals that have legitimate humanitarian and asylum claims that they can. Essentially, we want to establish a process that would make it easier for those individuals to have those claims heard without them embarking on this dangerous journey. The real tragedy here is that there are far too many men, women, and children that have attempted this journey. Many of them have been killed. Others have been victimized in terrible ways when they have sought to embark on that journey. And so that is what we are trying to prevent. And there are a variety of ways in which we've tried to confront this challenge. And those efforts only attract some attention, I think, when there's a surge at the border or there are some enforcement actions. But I can assure you that since the summer of 2014, this is something that has been part of an intense focus by the Department of Homeland Security.
I'm going to ask you, speaking of about the State of the Union, could you give me maybe 3 words to describe, I know it's a bit of a preview, the President's intentions in this year's State of the Union?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I can shrink it down to 3 words, but I can certainly tell you that the President intends to use this opportunity to convey his optimism about the future of the country and to convey his optimism about the ability of this country to confront the challenges that are ahead of us, but also to capitalize on the opportunities that are there for the taking.
Would you expect him to acknowledge some of the promises that have not yet been fulfilled as well, including closing the prison at Guantanamo Bay, including ending the war in Afghanistan, maybe even comprehensive reform on immigration?
Well, again, some of those things that you mentioned are things that haven't happened because they were specifically blocked by members of Congress, and at least one of them was something that was blocked by Republicans in Congress. So I'm not sure the President can be held accountable for that. But surely the President, well, I'll let you watch the speech tomorrow and conclude for yourself.
Oh, go on.
That there are many Americans from both parties who are concerned about Washington being broken and the dysfunction. To what extent does the President want to use the speech as a chance to talk about his use of executive power to try to leap over the body that he'll be speaking to?
Well, Alexis, I recognize that that's how our critics often characterize executive actions. But the fact is, we have been clear at every stage that the President taking an executive action does not in any way absolve Congress of their responsibility to take action. The President didn't take action to keep guns out of the wrong hands as a way to go around Congress. He did that because he wanted to use every element of his authority to try to keep our communities and our kids safe, or at least make them safer. And we are just as convinced as we were the day before the President announced these actions that Congress needs to pass legislation, common sense steps that would, for example, close the gun show loophole, or close the no-fly, no-buy loophole that currently allows somebody who's on the no-fly list to buy a gun. We certainly believe that there's legislation that could be passed to ensure that gun manufacturers are actually held accountable, both for their business practices and for their products. So the President's executive actions are not at all a substitute for congressional action. The same is true when it comes to minimum wage. The same is true when it comes to immigration reform. This is, I recognize that there are some members of Congress who are hoping that this gets them off the hook, that they can somehow use the President's action as an excuse not to act. But they're learning the wrong lesson if that's the case they want to make.